Okay, let's pray. Heavenly Father, we thank you for this morning. We thank you for the gift of life. We thank you for the opportunity to gain wisdom. We thank you for the opportunity to better ourselves and our businesses. And we just pray that you continue to guide us in this session. We learn the things you need us to learn and implement them in our lives. In Jesus' name.
Amen, amen, and amen. Welcome to the call, people. Without wasting the English will come. Without wasting much time, I would like to welcome our presenter of the day, Director Grace. Please unmute your mics and let's welcome Director to take us through our first session of the week.
Director, you're most welcome.
Even me, I'm happy. Good morning, everyone, and I hope you had a nice weekend. And welcome. It's an honor and a privilege for us to host you and learn together. So this morning, I want us to talk about the psychology of spending money. Now, my Zoom is just beginning again. Let me just exit this one. You can't believe what technology was doing to me. On my laptop, it jammed, so I had to switch my phone. Now it has just fired up after like 10 minutes. Okay, before we go to the psychology of spending money, something that we've been thinking about seriously is the idea of debt. We realize debt is upon us, and how do we get into debt, and how do we manage debt, and how do we get out of debt? So watch out for the next maybe week or two. We'll be able to help you wrestle this animal to the ground and win and come out on top. Let you not feel defeated that debt is upon us and then there's nothing we can do. It's something that we can really conquer and get to the bottom of it all. But to start us off, I just wanted us to talk about how do you spend your money. This gentleman you may be very familiar of is called Jack Welch. Jack Welch was a former General Electric CEO, and he once nearly died of a heart attack. And years later, when he was asked what went through his mind when he was being rushed to the hospital during that heart attack, his words, I quote, "Damn it, I didn't spend enough money," was Welch's response. The interviewer wondered and asked him, of all things, why do you say that you didn't spend enough money? So Welch says that we are all products of our background. He says then that I didn't have two nickels rubbed together, and when I was young. So what he really wanted was, this thing is disturbing me. What he really wanted was, he lived a relatively cheap life, and he always bought cheap wine. But since that time when he had a heart attack, he promised himself, he swore to God, I'll never buy a bottle of wine for less than $100. That's it. Like, I'll never buy a bottle of wine less than $100. So why does that fascinate the interviewer? This is it. Money is so complicated. There's a human element that defies logic. It's personal, it's messy, it's emotional. Behavioral finance is now well documented, but we'll look at some of the things in the coming few minutes. And what we can say that how you spend money can reveal an existential struggle of what you find valuable in life, who you want to spend time with, and why you chose your career, and the kind of attention you want from other people. So the idea of spending money is not just as simple as you may seem to think. In the book, The Psychology of Money, the author says that the money is the greatest show on earth. Money is the greatest show on earth because of its ability to reveal things about people's character and values. How we invest our money remains hidden or tends to be hidden from the view of many people. But how we spend the money is far visible to many people. And that is the interesting part that we shall dive in. Number one, there just maybe about 6 things I want to deal with. There are 12, but for the time that we have, I can only fit in maybe 4 or 6. Number one, I want you, as we go through this, to reflect on your family of origin, on your family that you have now, you with your spouse, and then see where you fall, and then see how you're raising your children. But number one, your family background and past experiences heavily influence your spending preferences. There was a Washington Post headline of June 1927 that said, "The more you are snubbed while poor, the more you enjoy displaying your wealth." The more you were snubbed while poor, the more you enjoy displaying your wealth. And this is timeless and explains so much. After COVID, there's a concept of revenge spending, a furious blast of conspicuous consumption, letting out everything that had been pent up and held back in 2020. Revenge spending on a broad level also happens to us even now. And the most stunning examples we've seen wealthy adults who grew up poor. They were heckled, they were bullied, they were teased for being poor as kids. Their revenge spending mentality can become apparent and permanent as they grow up. Even if you dig into it, if you think, you see that disproportionate share of those with biggest homes, fastest cars, and the shiniest jewelry grew up snubbed in some way. Part of their current spending isn't about getting value out of a flashy material good. It's about healing a social wound inflicted on you when you are still young. It reminds me of a friend of mine who said he grew up poor and he had to go to the neighbors to watch TV. And so when he became wealthy, each bedroom has its own TV. He will not allow his children to suffer because of TV and go to the neighbors to watch TV. Even when wound is the wrong word, the desire to show the world that you've made it increases. If you grew up snubbed out of what you wanted, to someone who grew up in an old money affluent family, a car is the norm. But those who grew up with nothing, the car may serve as an ultimate symbol of you have made it. And a lot of spending is done to fulfill deep-seated psychological need. You may be fighting your spouse. Kumbe, the person has a wound that they are really, they have never healed of. That's number one. Number two, there is what they call entrapped by spending. So what does that mean? It means that rather than using money to build a life, your life is built around money. There's a guy called George Vanderbilt. Some of you may know him, that built for 6 years a huge house with 40 master bedrooms and a full-time staff of 400. But allegedly spent little time there because he was utterly unaddressed to the possible arrangement of life. The house cost a lot to maintain it, that 90% of the land was sold off to pay tax debts, and the house turned into just a tourist attraction. In some literature, they call this a Pyrrhic victory, where when you surmount the mountain, you're really as tired and it's not worth the celebration. In 1875, an op-ed said, and that's an opinion in the newspaper, said that socialites devote themselves to pleasure regardless of the expense. Then a Vanderbilt heir responded and actually said that socialites devote themselves to expense regardless of pleasure. In other words, they will spend whether they get the pleasure or not. The devotion to expense regardless of pleasure is really something that we ought to look at. Let me ask you, Part of this belief is the belief that spending money will make you happier. Part of this belief is the belief that spending money will make you happier. When it doesn't, either because it never will, or because you haven't discovered purchases that bring joy, your reaction is that you must not be spending enough. So you double down again and again. Because you bought something, you didn't feel happy, so you buy a bigger one. Question to you on this call. Who of you has ever bought a cheaper TV after the TV that you had got spoiled? Or a cheaper phone after buying another one? You find that the phone you buy is actually now more expensive than the previous one. And that really gets us, it's like a noose around our neck. I've often wondered how many personal bankruptcies and financial troubles were caused by spending that brought no joy to begin with. It must be enormous. And it's a double loss. Not only are you in trouble, but you didn't even have fun getting there, even getting into debt. But what about those spending? How about those whose spending is driven by the belief that money is to be spent regardless of the pleasure it brings? Money has them by the neck. They're held in captivity by its influence. If we are not careful, we will buy and not feel happy, and then buy a bigger one to feel happy, until we are now just spending regardless of the expense, even regardless of whether we get joy out of it or not. Number 3, there's something called frugality inertia. Frugality inertia means a lifetime of good saving habits can't be transitioned into a spending phase. And I'm going to explain what all that means. What happens is that many people save their money and they develop very good habits to spend. But the ultimate goal can break down when your relationship with money becomes an ingrained part of your personality. So you struggle to break away from focusing on money because the focus itself is a big part of who you are. If you develop an early system of saving and living way below your means, congratulations, you've won. But if you can never break away from that system and insist on heavy saving regimen well into your retirement, then what is it? Is that still winning? Many of the financial planners have said that one of their biggest challenges is getting their clients to spend money in retirement, even in appropriate conservative amounts. Frugality and saving become such a big part of their people's identity, that's very hard to switch gears and then start spending in retirement. You've gotten so used to saving that even when you must spend, when you told yourself, when I'm 65, I'll begin spending, you just can't bring yourself to spend the money. So you just keep it and keep on saving the money. Watching the money compound gives them more pleasure than they would spending it. When they spend it, they feel actually bad. But those whose ultimate goal is to stop thinking about money are stuck, refusing to recognize that you've actually met your goal can actually be as bad as never meeting that goal to begin with. So what is your goal? At what point will you realize that you have now saved enough and you're living a healthy life and you need to spend that money? Number 4, an emotional attachment to large purchases, particularly a house. Now, let me move on this one very slowly. A friend and his wife prided themselves in making unemotional financial decisions. As in, for them, they made decisions without emotions, especially financial decisions. But a few years when they were in the market for their first house, they found one they liked, and they headed toward the house and promised themselves that they will never be in a rush, and they will never make a decision emotionally, a financial decision emotionally. And they just said they were gathering information around it. They were just gathering information, no emotional entanglement with the property. So as they pulled into the driveway, the wife gasped and said, "I love it." He did too, and they had an infant, a son, a young one, who was their first son. And that house had a kid's tree swing just in the front porch. And that was a perfect match. And that was it. Emotion became involved, and there was nothing they could do about it. They have zero regrets, and the house is great. The point I'm making is this: no one should pretend that you can make life-changing decisions that will massively impact you and your family and treat it like a math problem. Buying a house or selling a house is a very emotional decision one has to make. And part of me thinks that the reason why we have not yet purchased property or imagined buying a house is we've not brought ourselves to imagine the emotions that are actually involved. I am told that if you want to make an emotional decision, or if you want to make a decision that is worth keeping, then you have to bring your emotional level way up there. Let me explain what I have said. It is better to write your weight loss plan in a gym than a restaurant. If you write your weight loss program from a restaurant, you're not going to have the emotional threshold. You're not going to reach the emotional threshold that's needed for you to actually make the best of a weight loss plan. Your plans to read, and you say this year, I'm going to read a book a month or a week or whatever it is, are better made in a library, not a bar. In a bar, you will not make a reading plan come to fruition because the emotions will not raise to the level that make you understand what is needed to actually commit to reading a book. Neither will you make plans to pray in church if your goal is to have a better relationship with God, and you say, you know what, God, this year I'm making a plan to grow closer to you while lying on your bed. In your bed, you don't have the emotional state to bring you up to make a commitment with God that this year you'll be more of a prayer warrior. So that should help us really understand that many of the purchases that we make are really emotional, and we should raise the emotions to that level that allow us make that purchase guilt-free. Number 5, which I'll end on number 5. The joy of spending can diminish as incomes rise because there is less struggle, sacrifice, and sweat represented in purchase. I've heard my wife say that this last Christmas was not as fun as the other Christmases. Why? Because meat and chicken are easily available. So you don't find the reward. You don't struggle to get chicken as it used to be in the early or the mid 80s. In his 1903 book, The Quest for Simple Life, William Dawson writes, "The thing that is least perceived about wealth is that all pleasure in money ends at the point where the economy becomes unnecessary. A man who can buy anything he covets without any consultation with his banker values nothing that he buys. If you can buy without thinking about the bank balance, then you stop actually getting the benefit out of that purchase. Consider how you spend the money when you first got your first paycheck. You celebrated maybe with a milkshake or bought a pair of shoes or a dress or whatever you bought. But the idea was that I bought this with my own money and I have sweated for it and I deserve to be rewarded. Going from not being able to buy anything to be able to buy something is an amazing feeling. The gap between struggle and reward is a big part of what makes people happy. Contrast it with later on in your career. Savings have been built and paychecks have grown. It's not that spending won't make you happy, but it won't be as thrilling and as adrenaline inducing as it was when there was more struggle behind each shilling. A guy with a private chef served with 5-star meals 3 times a day, an arrangement he's enjoyed for 5 years, is not the same as you who struggles to eat a chicken tonight. But envious as we are of their lifestyle, you wonder whether anything changes when you take him out to a restaurant, because the restaurant food is what he really has at home as his daily normal delicacy. There is a saying that the best meal you'll ever taste is a glass of water when you're thirsty. All forms of spending have that equivalent. There's a quotation by Richard Nixon that's a bit absurd. He says that the unhappiest people of the world are those in the international watering places like the south coast of France and the Newport and Palm Springs and Palm Beach, going to parties every night, golfing every afternoon, drinking too much, talking too much, thinking too little, retired with no purpose. So the point I'm making here is this, that whereas we say that we want to be able to have money so that we spend money without thinking, the ultimate goal is actually to have struggle in getting that money so that the spending is worth the while, and then you don't have to, you'll get as much joy in spending as when you are earning it. But let me now add number 6 so that we really wrap up this. It's a quote from, I get it from a guy called Ramit Sethi. Ramit Sethi says that the problem with our spending is asking $3 questions when $30,000 questions are all that matters. So there's a saying, save a little bit of money each month, and at the end of the year, you'll be surprised how little you still have. So author Ramit Sethi says that too many people ask $3 questions. How can I afford this latte? Or how can I afford this coffee? And when all that matters to financial success are $30,000 questions, what college should I go to? Or who should I work with? I'll be skipping all lunches so that I can save versus how can I make money to cover all meals below $100? Or how can I spend meals below $100 without thinking? How can I, Ramit himself says that he has made sure that any spending below, I think it's $1,000, he just spends it without necessarily asking. There is a historian called Cyril Parkinson. He called a term called Parkinson's law of triviality. It says that the amount of attention a problem gets is the inverse of its importance. So this is how it was done. An experiment was done. A finance committee, true story, and this may apply to your home or workplace. A finance committee was given 3 tasks: to approve $10 million nuclear reactor, to approve $400 employee bike shed, and approve a $20 for employee refreshment or snacks in the break room. The committee went ahead and approved 10 million nuclear reactor immediately because the number is too big to contextualize in their brains. Alternatives are too daunting to consider, and no one on the committee was an expert in nuclear power. So they said, nuclear power, $10 million, that's good. We can go ahead and spend that money. The bike shed gets considerably more debate. Committee members argued whether the bike rack would suffice and whether the shed should be wood or aluminum, because they have some experience working with those materials at home. The issue of employee refreshment took up 2/3 of the debating time because everyone has a strong opinion of what's the best coffee, the best cookies, the best mandazis, whether they should have the mandazis with a hole or the ones which don't have a hole in it, or whether pork is white meat or not. You may be having the same argument at home. Many households actually operate the same way. The issue is, are you asking $3 questions or asking $30,000 questions? Ladies and gentlemen, let's end there and welcome questions and comments. We have 5 minutes left. Sorry, I overshot my time. Back to you, Chairman Sidi. City, woo.
Thank you so much, Director. You always check tables. Yes, people, in case there are any questions, we have only 4 minutes. I'm going to kindly ask you to shoot your hand up or use the chat option if we have any questions for Director. The directors, we wait for questions from the rest. I think my what was on the $3 question vis-a-vis the, was it $30? Was it 3,000?
30,000.
30,000, $3 versus 30,000. I feel like that could have been a session on its own. What happens if I cannot even afford the 30,000? Is it realistic? Won't I end up daydreaming? If now I start asking about, because some things might be totally way out of my reach, and some people start saying, don't daydream. I don't know if you can speak into that.
I was reviewing part of the things I wrote down. In 2017, I wrote down and said, how can I live my life in such a way that my grandchildren never have to suffer having their fees paid? Now, versus how can I make sure that I save on fuel today? Okay, so the best thing is that let me walk up to Tinder, then from Tinder I'll grab a taxi to town. We have, our brain power will be devoted to that which we put it to. We can decide to put our brain power to, let me walk from Naya to Tinder first, then I'll jump on a judge or I'll jump into a taxi to town. And we can think of that. And we will save, 2K, 5K, right? Now we save that. At the end of the year, we'll have some little money. But if we put our brain power to questions that can actually change the way we think, how can I make sure that cross-generational poverty ends with me? How can I make sure that by the time my daughter gets married, I can fund her wedding? Then that will move you from the gravitational pull of asking small questions, because the answers we get are dependent on the questions that we ask of ourselves. When you devote your time to thinking time, your thinking your return on thinking will be directly proportional to the question that you ask yourself. And if you devote time to thinking, then it should be that if you have a good question, you'll get a good answer and have a good life. If you ask yourself a weak question, who is the next girl I should marry? Then you will get a weak answer and you will get a weak, a small life. So the thing is, I'll give you an example. One day, probably about 10 years ago, I asked myself a question and I said, how can I live a life? How can I grow a life in such a way that I tithe 1 million shillings per week for 52 weeks? And by the end of 52 weeks, my tithe is 52 million. So I'm going to work my life backwards in such a way that by Sunday, my tithe is actually 1 million. Now, you can decide to contextualize whatever you want to do. You can decide to be actually faithful in the tithe and bring 2K faithfully. I'm not saying there's anything wrong with that, but I chose to ask myself a bigger question 10 years ago about how I could do that, and then begin thinking at that level. I don't know whether that makes sense.
It does. Makes a lot of sense. People, I think I'm going to start passing a Chibocha director, but anyway, thank you so much for blessing us. I saw there are some few hands up, but our time is fast spent. So
for instance, let me ask you. Yeah. There is a guy I was reading about. I think he's the one who wrote God help me. The name has gone. High performance habits. But he said one of the questions he asks in the book is, ask yourself, how can I be the best husband today as you go back home? Now, if you keep asking yourself, how can I be the best husband? Brendan Bashad. If you ask yourself, how can I be the best husband today? And allow yourself, when you leave work, do not just go back home and reach home and then, or as you're going back home, park by the roadside. Take 10 minutes to transition from sales director, hustler, money maker, CEO, to transition to be husband. And ask yourself, in the next 5 minutes, as I go back home, how can I present myself, my family, as the best husband there is in the whole world? I think that would be a much better question to ask of yourself than ask yourself, this woman eats a lot of food every day. How can we make sure that we eat less? And then that won't help you at all. Yeah. Chairman, back to you and you wrap up.
People will be, for any further questions, Friday, we'll come back on Friday. I know that some people's hands were up, but in the interest of time, we'll not be able to answer those questions. We'll be back tomorrow with another exciting speaker. It's Self Warrior. But I think, Director, I'll just hand over to you to just close us off with 1 or 2 remarks.
Money is an interesting subject that never ceases to amaze me. Because I have suffered because of it. But also you realize that the person you're with and the people around you really behave in such a way that they have wounds they're trying to heal. And unless those wounds are identified and you will heal from, then money will actually, will build our lives around money. And money will actually be our God. You want to literally worship it, but it will dictate what you do and how you spend. And sometimes, ladies and gentlemen, sometimes we are too stingy and tight-fisted for not even our own good. When was the last time you actually ate ice cream and just let yourself eat ice cream and you are free to do this without counting the cost? Jack Welch said, you know what, he stopped buying cheap wines. I don't know what the equivalent for you would be, but for heaven's sake, don't be a martyr. Don't be a martyr, Banange. God bless you. Have a lovely, wonderful day. God bless money.